Hear that? Believe it or not, summer is just around the corner. Luckily, Armor All, America's most trusted auto appearance brand, has what your car needs to get that perfect summer shine. Plus, now through May 31st, we'll give you $5 for every $20 you spend on Armor All products. That means car wash pods, protectant, tire shine, you name it. Find out how to get your $5 rebate at armorall.com. Armor All, less work, more clean. Terms apply.
You can't see me, but I'm wearing an awesome Single Tracks hat right now. It's actually the reason my voice sounds so amazing. Okay, so maybe not, but you never know until you get a hat for yourself. Go to shop.singletracks.com to find Single Tracks hats, t-shirts, stickers, tubular headwear, and can coolers. Shipping is free within the USA, and your purchase helps support the Single Tracks podcast. That's shop.singletracks.com, and thank you for your support. Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today our guest is Brad Copeland. Brad worked his way up the bike tuning chain from shop mechanic to a full-time position at Specialized Bicycles, and he eventually landed a spot wrenching for the brand's domestic teams. His racing and career interest lay deep in the dirt side of cycling, and when asked to travel with the Specialized World Cup cross-country athletes to a few events, he excitedly accepted. Copeland developed lasting friendships with several of the riders, eventually becoming the primary traveling wrench for Kate Courtney, who would then go on to win both a rainbow jersey and a World Cup overall title. When Kate switched to the Scott-SRAM race team, she was able to bring Copeland with her, which doesn't happen in cross-country as often as it does in downhill racing. The pair are working hard to prepare for what the 2020 season holds, and Giroux recently chatted with Copeland to get the story from his side of the pits. This discussion wasn't originally intended to be a podcast, but given Copeland's passionate descriptions, we wanted to share the raw recording with you here. Enjoy.
How'd you end up at the level you're at?
You know, I remember being 5 years old. I think it was my 5-year-old Christmas. In my stocking, I got a copy of Mountain Bike Action magazine, among other things like Road and Track and some stuff my dad threw in there.
Yeah.
I was into BMX already, kind of in the way that a 5-year-old could be, who's seen the X Games and thought it was totally rad.
Yeah.
And had a bike kind of like that and wanted to go build a ramp in my driveway. And so my dad was just like, yeah, whatever, here's some magazines. And not anticipating maybe how much of an impact that would have. But
right.
I kind of became obsessed with bikes, and I had a bike, and I didn't have a car, obviously. So that was something I could kind of emulate. And I just sort of fell in love with riding really early. And kind of actually wanted to, as I got bigger, get a, more serious BMX bike. My parents sort of, I wouldn't say discourage it, but kind of encouraged me to get a mountain bike because there's something more useful, generally useful than a BMX bike as I got older and bigger and needed a new bike. And and so I got a mountain bike. It was a rigid Marin steel mountain bike that I kind of lusted after and saved my money for a long time. And I was about 8 years old, I think, when I got my first mountain bike. So that's when I started mountain biking, loved it, and just that's all I did, and became really interested in all of the technical nuances, as I would just, I had 3 or 4 magazine subscriptions and would memorize every catalog and, go into the bike shop and know more than they did about the products, because I just sat there and memorized catalog and magazine after magazine.
Totally.
And so when I was 11 years old, I moved to North Carolina from Pennsylvania, and there was a shop very close to where my new house was, and I would go in there every day, just looking around alone, and they were like, "Who is this random kid riding his bike in here every day, just staring at stuff?" And they started sort of encouraging me to come on group rides, and there were some mountain bike races locally at a place in the town that I lived in, which was Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Okay. And so they kind of got me to go out there and give it a try, and I got second place in my first race. I was like, this is fun, maybe I'll win if I keep trying and get a better bike. And one thing led to another, and when I was 12, I started working at that bike shop, kind of just sweeping and cleaning and stocking shelves and maybe fixing flat tires if I, really was feeling confident that day.
Yeah.
And that's when I started learning, and it was kind of because they basically let me learn to sort of keep my bike running and upgrade it and, do little things to, without having to actually pay retail for stuff as a 12-year-old.
Sure.
I was working, being compensated, not a lot, but enough to continue doing it. And they could tell I just really liked it and was like super enthusiastic and like generally knowledgeable. Like I didn't know shit about working on the bikes yet, but I knew a lot about them.
Yeah.
Just from reading the specs and stuff and memorizing them, and to this day retain a lot of very period specific knowledge from like the late 90s about bikes that I would say would rival anyone, and
nice.
whether it's worth it or not anymore. And
right.
So that's kind of where I cut my teeth as a 12-year-old starting out in the shop. And then by the time I was 14, I was like, I would say generally competent as a bike mechanic. Generally not very like broadly, but do kind of the basics, like, as far as like building a bike up or tuning a bike or doing, general bicycle shop tasks. Maybe some things were a little outside my scope, but at that point was generally competent. And so at that point I started they started letting me work on the fancy bikes, took a while.
Cool.
Getting a lot of the shit bikes for the first few years, and rightfully so. But as with anyone who's sort of obsessed with like a sport that has a lot of equipment in it, you're always drawn to the fancy high end, newest, greatest stuff. And so maybe it was because I sort of dangled that over my, as like the carrot for a while, that I always like really wanted to work on the fancy bikes that kind of hooked me. And I just really found a lot of, because with nice bikes, obviously, like you can, the more perfect you are, the more perfect the result is, and the better the experience is. And so that was kind of always the pursuit after that. And then once that was sort of within my competency, then it was how do you make these top of the line bikes work even better than they might. And so that was kind of the next chapter. And so fast forward, probably I was in a bike shop basically from age 12 through college, whether part-time or full-time, always as, wherever I'd go, first thing I would do when I moved to a new place was find what I believed to be the coolest bike shop or best bike shop, or the one that aligned most with my interests, and then try to work there at least part-time just to have, to have like a shop and the resources of a bike shop close at hand.
Sure.
Wherever I lived, because for me that was valuable, and also, access to spare parts and used stuff, and some like the, take off parts bins that are always in the back of a bike shop that, don't really
it's
have
invaluable.
access to unless you're an employee there. All that stuff was very valuable to me as like a, real geeky kind of nerdy bike guy who wanted to always have, projects going and restoring old weird bikes, and, I needed access to that stuff. So I always was eager to get into a bike shop, and, generally had the skills to go in there and interview, demonstrate that, whether it's like through build a new bike and see how you did kind of thing, or sometimes just on references from previous shops, but always managed to get in there and take care of, take care of that side of my kind of bike needs that way, and make a little money on the side. So through college I was kind of doing that, but always thought, eventually this is going to dry up and I'll have to get a real job and graduate from college and move on. So I actually did do that, and after college I went to the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and after college I moved to Washington D.C. To work in like a government contracting job doing communications work. It was just super dull, dry, boring, uninspiring. How many other words? And to describe this, you get the point. And so, meanwhile, I had found yet another bike shop in town. It was like, to this day, it was probably one of the nicest bike shops I've ever walked into, just in terms of like what was, on the showroom floor and in the cabinets and shelves and stuff. And I was very impressed. And it was a bike shop in Arlington, Virginia that it was called Fresh Bikes, and it had like one of the largest group rides in the country. And so I was exposed to that first by going on the group ride. Found the bike shop, was like, holy crap, I've never seen a shop like this. Knew some people who knew some people at the shop, and kind of got introduced, and And yeah, so I started working there part-time, like 10 or 12 hours a week while I had this other job. And at one point, right around the time that I was really ready to, well, I was pretty over this job. I was ready to quit or do something. The guy at the bike shop left, the mechanic in the bike shop, full-time guy left, right in the springtime, right as things got busy. And this was like a pretty high-end shop that, one of the top grossing shops in the country, I guess. I was told,
Wow.
And it, received a lot of those bicycle retailer and industry news, like Top Shop awards all the time,
Right.
And so they had, I guess, enough money to do make an offer like this, where they basically just matched my salary from my other job to come on board full time at this job. And I was like, well, no brainer, definitely going to do that.
Yeah.
And had made friends with the guys there, so it was much more appealing work environment in general, doing something I liked and was competent at, none of which I would say was true of the other job that I had. And so I'd originally kind of been like, I don't really like living here, I'm going to leave. And then I stayed for another 5.5 years or so.
Oh, wow.
5 years maybe for that time. And it was only at the end when I met my now wife, who was at the time also in North Carolina, moved up briefly with me to be I was actually living in Arlington, Virginia, outside of D.C. And then we moved together to Pennsylvania, back to her hometown for a year, where I spent that year working and opening a shop with another guy in town, our own shop, which, we were only going to be in Pennsylvania for a year. Her parents were leaving for a year to live in Greece, and they offered us to live in their house and knew we both kind of wanted to get out of D.C. So we lived in their house knowing we had a 1-year timeline to figure out the next chapter.
Yeah.
And so I opened this bike shop. We thought maybe we'd stay in Lancaster, but kind of got an itch. Maybe it was when we spent like 5 or 6 months. It wasn't a true quarantine, but we basically were in our own house in the wintertime in Pennsylvania under snow, and kind of realized maybe that wasn't the life for us after all.
Yeah.
And, started looking at the map, where would there not be snow right now, and found California popping out very, very loudly in those winter months. And so she found a program in Monterey. I had only ever been to California once before, and it was to the Sea Otter Classic in Monterey, and asked if I would ever consider moving to Monterey. And I was like, yes, absolutely. That place is awesome. So, she had a plan. I didn't really. I figured I'd find a bike shop again and walk in the door and get a job, which that kind of is what happened, actually. But my real plan at the time, and had been a plan a couple of times throughout my life, was to try to get a job at Specialized. I actually applied to some jobs there right out of college as well.
Yeah.
Which I never amounted to anything. I don't think I even got much beyond like 1 or 2 emails back before no one answered my call anymore. But being in California made it much more possible to go in for interviews and see people in person. And
sure.
And so I had made some connections, whether with like sales reps or friends of friends who'd worked there, either at the time or previously, who kind of linked me up with a few people who I should call or talk to. And it took a few months, but I started doing a little temp work, like bike demos for shops or regions where many dealers would come for new product demos. And I would like be a random mechanic there, setting bikes up, doing suspension, pressure and tire pressure, and just whatever I could do. And it would be like I'd have a week of work, and then I'd spend 3 weeks like not hearing from anybody, wondering if I'll ever work again. It was kind of stressful because I didn't have a huge like savings in the bank that I was comfortable enough living on for a long time. And so after a few months, it got pretty tight, and I was like kind of ready to give up and didn't know what was going to happen. And then out of the blue, this is where part 2 of your question is the harder part to answer. Yeah. Part 2 was, I'd been doing, they also have a bike shop in Specialized headquarters, I might add, where I did spend like 6 weeks early on, while they were waiting for someone who they'd hired to work in there to actually move from Ohio to California to begin working in the shop. So I, through friends and connections and their recommendation, got to work in there part-time, which was very fortunate, because in doing so, like people from Mike Senior, the president of the company, on down, everybody came through there at one point or another to have something done to their bike, because it was there to service employee bikes as well as do other more formal business profitable business things like set up bikes for PR events and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I met people, some people I didn't even know who they were, relatively speaking, in the company. Like, I just was there helping everybody without much understanding of the org chart,
Yeah.
And so, anyway, fast forward, it's like February now. I started doing that stuff in like October, I think, of 2014.
Mm-hmm.
So like February 2015, it had been a long winter. I was basically a month away from being totally broke and kind of hopeless and in despair. And then I got a phone call from the guy who was in charge of global sports marketing at the time. His name is Gavin Noble. He's a good guy who I had actually met without realizing who he was once or twice in the shop. And he said that he'd been asking around, looking to hire internally, and had gotten a number of people who he spoke with internally at Specialized who recommended me, even though I wasn't technically an employee, but they knew I was looking to become one, and that I had the skill set to do the job, which was to be a Specialized racing mechanic based out of Morgan Hill, so kind of liaising between the main office and the race program, and in this case it was like the triathlon program and mountain bike program.
Okay.
And all the product stuff comes out of Morgan Hill and is funneled globally to all the teams and riders, and so that was sort of my job, and I would occasionally go to some races if they needed me to do some like on the ground support, but only domestically, only in the United States. Yeah. And then like 2 weeks later, I got a schedule and I had like a full calendar of domestic races to go to, like 2 a month. And I was like, oh wow, that's a lot more travel than I thought. Oh god. And then about a week later, turned out there was a conflict with the Enduro World Series race and some cross-country World Cups. And they asked if I wanted to go to Europe to be at some World Cups. And maybe I should mention too that when I started racing when I was 11, I kept racing cross-country through about age 26. So that was like my thing. Cross-country, was my specific interest. And so for me, that was like the dream offer. And it wasn't really what I'd signed up for. But I said yes without even talking to my wife or anybody. It was like a 3-week trip. And I was like, no, for sure, I'm definitely going. This was like late spring 2015. I was thinking the month of May was when that trip was planned for, but I'd already been working with, Kate, among others. At that time, she was very young and was like kind of the kid sister of the team. Leah Davison was like the main woman on the team from the United States. Todd Wells was on our team then. Howard Grotz was on our team then. And so I was supporting those four primarily, plus occasional, sometimes like Christoph Salzer came over for a race in the United States, and Simon Andreasen came over at the time as a young rider. So we were helping out those guys too. But, it was getting really more comfortable with the Americans. We've been traveling around a lot for the whole spring. And I think after that first World Cup trip, Leah in particular was vocal about how nice it had been to have a mechanic who'd been kind of, who spoke, English very well and could communicate effectively. That's kind of one part of it maybe, but the other was somebody who was familiar with their bikes and their setup and could just sort of be the same person doing the same thing at all the races and not having to kind of go back and forth between mechanics and explain all the differences that maybe you've made since they last saw you and kind of deal with all that. And it just took a lot of the pressure and stress off of, the American riders who were kind of doing that, whereas the European riders on our team at the time did, kind of had the same support at every race, more or less. So it was kind of a nice thing for the American riders, and they liked it. And so they, Leah, I think, was probably the one who led the charge initially, who asked if I could be there for all of her, for all of the races. And there's a few races that year where some of the travel and accommodations had already been made for, that I couldn't take over basically, or at least not without, the team paying double, which they weren't going to do. So I went to I think 5 World Cups of the full season that year, not the full season. I missed 1 or 2 of them. Plus the full domestic thing and, a couple other things, plus some triathlon stuff, which I also did at Specialized. But then the following year, so for beginning 2016 onward, I was then, full-time doing that job now. So the job that I originally signed up for at Specialized was to sort of almost falling by the wayside, and eventually we hired another person to kind of pick up that end of it, so that I could, be away as much as I was without stuff, not happening back home.
Right.
And, over the years, then we had quite a bit of success on the team. Leah herself took a second place at World Championships in 2016, and the riders and the team in general were doing very well. And Kate obviously was coming up during those years as well. And, that side of the story got very interesting a lot quicker than we thought. But she and I live rather close to each other. She's only like an hour and a half or so away from me in Palo Alto.
Yeah.
And so, that's where she was in school at Stanford during that time. And so, we could meet and would often meet just for sometimes, just to ride, not without any business to attend to.
Sure.
Sometimes there was business to attend to, but for the most part, it was just like getting together because we liked hanging out. And,
sure.
But during those times also, I could kind of like make observations about her bike and her setup, and we talked about that stuff. And I think, a lot of the, the relationship that we have now is based on those early years when maybe she was getting less attention than, I don't know, maybe not than, I don't know if it was than she deserved, or than that she was just receiving based on kind of the hierarchy of the team. And she was a U23, and we had some elite riders who were very accomplished, and they were sort of regarded as the priority riders. And so she and a couple of other ones maybe didn't get the same level of attention, and I always thought she had a lot of potential and was like super appealing and very marketable also for the brand. And
sure.
I just saw a lot in Kate, I guess, and so I enjoyed spending the time trying to kind of hone her setup in and ask her questions that maybe she never thought of about her setup, and we could kind of work together to kind of tweak her bikes a little more than they had been to really hone it in. And I think that in that process, she kind of started trusting me with her stuff. And in general, I think it's nice for the riders to not have to be burdened with the thought of their own bike setup, or anything really for that matter. Anything they don't need to think about or focus on, if they can pass that off, I think that leads to potentially better results just straight away, because they can focus on what their job is. And some riders are very hands-on and very equipment savvy and really want to look at every bolt on their bike. Other riders they just are athletes, and they want to be an athlete, and they don't necessarily, I don't want to say they don't know about their equipment as much, but they don't that's not a source of deep fascination for them.
Yeah,
sure. It's just the difference of maybe how you grew up and what your relationship with your bike was early. I think for Kate, she'd rather have a perfect bike, kind of without having to necessarily do the hands-on stuff. And so I think she appreciates having someone who can talk to her, basically just take feedback. It doesn't have to be technical. It can just be general sensations that she had. And I'm pretty good at interpreting those, maybe because I've ridden a lot myself and done, haven't raced at the level that she has, or succeeded at the level that she has by not even close. But, I know how a race bike should be. I know what things you can do to a bike that make it, do one thing or another thing well, whether it's to be durable and last for, marathon distance race, what changes should we make to get through that race clean, or, how do we shave every last gram out of this bike, whatever it is. She just says, yeah, go for it. And, I trust you. Or if it comes back that she experienced something about it she didn't like, she's also very sensitive to those things and communicates it very well.
Oh, that's cool.
And it kind of leaves it to me to interpret her feedback and make the changes that I believe is what she's describing. And, I think we've gotten that right a lot of the time. And so I think that's sort of the foundation of where our success and the relationship that people are now, pretty aware of, the two of us, where that all began. And, I think that's also probably the most important thing with me leaving and going to Scott with Kate was, that relationship and that trust was sort of the thing that she was uncertain of as she was going to leave and join a totally new program, I think that having the one person that she knows that she can say it the way that she says it, give the feedback that she's comfortable and capable of giving, and know that that's going to translate into a bike that she feels comfortable on when it's time to go. And she knows that I've had quite a bit of experience working on bikes besides just specialized bikes. And I think trusted that, switching to something new would be perhaps less daunting for me than it was for her.
For sure.
She grew up, her first bike was a Specialized, and every bike until she switched in 2019 had been a Specialized. So I think there was some maybe just fear of the unknown there for her because she had never ridden anything else and had always been told by, the team and the brand that these are the best bikes and that's the end and that's all and that there can be no better bike. So, I was quick to reassure her that in fact there's many bikes that are, capable of being won on and it just comes down to the setup. And, so I was very happy, obviously, like we'd already kind of gotten off on our like fun escapades together at Specialized. And so to be able to continue, I'd already invested a lot of time and like personal interest and like emotion into already seeing Kate develop much quicker than we thought into the rider that she is. But, I was very happy to not have to kind of watch from afar as she kind of went off and continued, and to be able to stick by that and continue together was particularly, I thought, a gracious gesture on her part to want to continue. And also it shouldn't be forgotten that, teams don't have to just say yes to a rider who says, especially at that, she was the world champion, but she was quite a young rider and joining a new team and to say, yeah, I want to bring somebody else too. Like that's not a given.
Right.
And it's very kind of unusual in cross country. I'd say in motocross or like other motorsports, it's kind of common. In downhill, it's not uncommon for riders to have their mechanic who follows them team to team. Like guys like Aaron Gwynn or Troy Brosnan or Blake Rooney have had the same mechanics no matter what bikes they're riding, and that's kind of accepted. But I can't really think of too many examples in cross country where such a thing has kind of happened before.
Sure.
Where a relationship like that has sort of transcended the team structures and has become more of like a rider's personal mechanic type thing, regardless of team. So one thing I will say for Frishy, who's our team manager, Thomas Frischenecht, one of the legends of cross-country mountain biking himself, and somebody who I grew up during his heyday and was like always, he was kind of an idol in the sport for me. So also interesting to get to meet all these people now. That's just a side note, just for me to be sort of working among the same names that I was like reading about in magazines when I was 12 was like pretty odd. But
absolutely, man.
I kind of got over that, but
it's exciting.
It's cool.
Yeah.
But Frishy is like a super great guy, a gracious guy, a humble guy. He runs the number one mountain bike team in the world, and he does it like a family. And I think he values relationships like that and understands what their value is to a rider and to a team. And I think, he was and well before there was ever even talk of Kate leaving and joining Scott, he had been very complimentary of her and me and us together and how we operate. Would come up and tell me things about how he really appreciated the little touches I would put on her bike, and just because you could look at the bike and tell that somebody cared about Kate because of how the bike was set up, like he as a rider could see that and knew that. And, that's what I do too. That's why I do what I do to her bikes, but I do it, for her and for me. I don't necessarily expect everybody to notice or look at that closely, but he did. And with no, agenda or no reason that he had to, even if he felt that way, he took the time to come up to me. He didn't know me well at the time, other than that I was a mechanic for Specialized. And, he'd seen me around at the races, but he came up and said, I'll never forget it. It was at Worlds in Australia in 2017. And he said, like, I just wanted to say, we were at the Oakley house, just happened to be there at the same time, coincidentally. He was like, hey, I was taking a look at Kate's bike yesterday, and, I just looked at it, and there's so much detail built into that thing. And it's just really cool to see a mechanic who takes to kind of care of the rider, because, she can just look at that bike and know that it's been gone through top to bottom, and there's a lot of special stuff built in, and that is so good for the riders in these big races to have that confidence. And I was like, wow, what a nice thing to say. That's like so shocking, especially from this guy. That's amazing. One of the highlights of my career at that point, and still. And then the following spring, that was I guess the following spring. Who was that? Maybe it was actually that same spring. He had also had Sea Otter Classic. That was the year he was following Jenny Risfeds, who was his rider at the time, had won the gold medal in Rio at the Olympics in 2016. And Kate came out at Sea Otter Classic in April. Jenny was there, and Kate beat her, which was definitely Kate's biggest win at the time.
Yeah. And
the first guy I saw at the finish line was Frishy there, shake my hand and tell me congratulations and like what a important and special day this will be that we will remember, later as a really important day. Like he'd already thought about the whole scope of it, like it's like the scope of this win in the terms of Kate's career. Like he was already there with it, and and I just really always thought that was a respectable way of kind of conducting yourself, and
that's huge.
And like, because he's not just some random guy either,
Right.
He's like some random commander. He's like the dude. And so that was always really like meaningful, and he was always really approachable and friendly and had a positive attitude. And now that I'm on his team, and I'm around him all the time, that's kind of how he is with everyone basically. And so he has like kind of an aura or like a reputation for being kind of the people's champion, and like
cool.
in the riders champion, and he treats his riders, very, very well, and everybody's very taken care of and wants to do their job, whether it's the rider's job or the mechanic's job. And we have some of the best mechanics. Yannick and Kurt, my other two mechanics that I work with, are two incredible guys as well. And, we saw Lars win a World Cup this year. Obviously, Nino, is unbelievable, and Lars is taken care of by Kurt, Nino is taken care of by Yannick, and so we have guys behind the scenes who are some of the best in delivering some of the best, theoretically results. Of course, we have some of the best talent in the world on the bikes riding them too. So Frishy, the team is fairly small and like in terms of the size and scope of our setup compared to some of the other big teams like. Trek or Specialized, like our footprint at a race is not quite so big, but instead Frishy invests in the atmosphere, and making sure that we have that he has the talent, but not that it's just a team of individuals, but that everybody gets along. And he creates an environment where that's the way that it is, and everybody wants to do more, for each other. And it's just built into his program, and it's a feeling that we never had before.
That sounds fantastic.
And that we miss a lot now too, so it's like now we're sort of all kind of isolated around everywhere in the world that we
missing
live.
out on family time. Totally.
Yeah. So there's a lot of messaging back and forth among the team, and like meme sharing and just general stuff to kind of keep the vibe going. But, we spent the whole winter looking forward to getting back together. And so now, we're looking at another period at the same time, 4 or 5 months of continued like this. So it's been difficult. Our team spirit is like quite good, and so I'm not worried about that, but it's just like difficult because we want to be doing something that we're not allowed to do now. And, so that's like a thing, but it's nice to have a team you want to get back together with every time. And
absolutely. Yeah.
And people you want to be around when you're doing, long hours and long days, long weeks and months on the road. It's nice to be with people that you enjoy being with, because at the end of the day, that'll make or break the whole experience.
So you mentioned some things that he had pointed out, some like particular things that you had done to Kate's bike. What are some of those things that's going on with her new bike? Like what are some of the kind of like custom things that you've put together on it? Well,
so there's one particular feature that is widely kind of featured in some media stuff. I've done a few articles about her little blip button on her grip that's for her dropper post, and that was a fun project. As bikes become more and more electronic, there's not a lot of fiddling left to do as a mechanic. Not so much creativity available. So it's nice when those opportunities still present themselves. And we switched from Specialized, which those bikes have the brain suspension systems front and rear, which are not a true lockout, but kind of do almost all the way, lock the bike out and then unlock just automatically. So if you've ever ridden a Specialized, it's a cool technology that I always liked and I find very impressive in the engineering of that technology involved.
For sure.
And it works well, but you can never lock the bike out, nor is the bike ever fully active either, because you're always overcoming that platform, the brain system, before the suspension really comes alive. So, for Kate, who's never ridden anything but a Specialized, and for myself, who hadn't ridden anything but a Specialized in probably 10 years, at least not ridden it consistently.
Right.
When we switched to the Scott, the thing that was kind of the most foreign to both of us was having lockout levers again, and for her, for the first time ever. The good thing is that you can now have a bike that's totally locked out, or you can have a bike that's totally active, and you also have a middle setting where it's kind of a high damped, travel reduced setting that's good for like pedaling over rough dirt roads where you're seated and climbing and it's a little bit bumpy, so you don't want it fully locked out. So we have all these new kind of ways to have the bike behave, and you can control that yourself. So it turns out, once we got used to it, that having a real brain was actually better than having them in the suspension. And she had never ridden a bike that the suspension worked so well on, because it didn't have a brain to overcome, and so it was totally active. And not to mention, we get some favorable tuning help from RockShox, who are building suspension parts for Kate and her body weight specifically. So,
cool.
So that's nice. The only problem was, we also were just getting on the Axis electronic SRAM group for the first time, and it has, like most dropper posts, which Kate loves, by the way. Yeah. And almost never rides without. Nice. The dropper post lever was like a thumb actuated button, basically like a paddle button that mounts where a normal dropper lever would go. But that's also where the suspension lockout switches were located, and they made an option to put the suspension lockouts like above the grip, where you kind of like throw your thumb like an old thumb shifter. Yep. But her hands are like super small, as is the rest of her, and so she couldn't really push the lever far enough to full lockout without actually like removing her hand from the grip and doing it like like with her bare, like her whole hand. And so obviously that wasn't going to work. And we were kind of imagining some situations, and I was, Yannick and I were just imagining things in general with the group, because we found out from SRAM, this is super early, we're actually there for their product launch for Access. They did it in Arizona, and our team was there to kind of help promote it, and that was when I was first building Kate's race bikes for the season, and they told us that like the road ETAP parts could be paired with the mountain bike parts, and that got us thinking like we could use the blip buttons for their time trial shifter or triathlon shifter, where they're just like a rubber button that you can kind of place anywhere on the grip or on the on your TT extensions or whatever the case may be. You can basically put them wherever you want to, is the point, and they have a wire that runs into a little sending unit which sends the Bluetooth signal, which is the wireless part of the Access group, and that can control whatever you want it to, it turns out. So we sort of just rigged one up to see if it would work while we were there with the blip button, and to see if it would actually operate the seat post. And you have to use the app, the SRAM app, which you can download for free. It's just part of it, but you have to download the app, and you can go in the app and tell it'll recognize all the components that you have. You tell the blip box via the app that you want this button, which is plugged into this port in the blip box, to do this function, which was in this case the seat post. And so what that allowed for us to do was remove the Access paddle shifter thing that operated the dropper post, remove that altogether. It took a little bit of trial and error to kind of get the button placement just where we wanted it. We started out with it like behind the grip as like a thumb actuated thing, because it's like in the grip. It was kind of an awkward thing to try to get your thumb up there. And she wanted to be able to activate the suspension lockouts and the dropper post kind of more or less at the same time, because oftentimes you want to, unlock the suspension and drop the seat post at the same time before you hit a technical section, or, maybe other way around. So we made it so her index finger was the the button controller, and then the thumb was still just the suspension lockout switches. And with a few trial and error of like where exactly in the grip we want to put it, and where it wasn't interfering with normal riding, and where she could still hit the brakes, and also the button not be, too jammed up. That one took 6 weeks of trying it out. Eventually, I've started cutting the left grip down 13 millimeters. I know exactly where from that end of the grip to measure to the center of where the hole is going to be that I cut to put her button in. And we've done a lot to kind of clean up the aesthetics of it as well. But it's been a flawless system. Sweet. And it really cleans up the handlebar quite a bit. And, it's gotten a lot of attention because it's sort of novel and not many people have done it. Sure. Although I think a lot of people have done it since they've started seeing it, and I get a lot of questions about it, and it's been in some magazines. And Yannick has also done some pretty impressive ones where he's rewired a blip button, just the internals, into the shifter paddle on the right side. So like you have the axis shifter where you have the up and the down push, which is normal, and then dead center in the paddle he's put this other button, which is the dropper post. And so we've been experimenting with that. I'm not sure that's going to be the answer for anyone, but we've kind of just, once we realized there was sort of unlimited creativity in that, if you go down that road, you suddenly have a lot of new ideas of just how you can control your bike. And obviously with like a mechanical system, a cable and the housing, you're sort of limited by, the nature of how they function. Where you can be creative in that way, and with the electronic stuff, with no wires at all, you kind of have a whole new thing to think about in terms of how you can be creative to make the bike more intuitive and efficient for the riders to use. And there have been studies with Nino about how often he's switching between suspension modes, and I'd be very curious now that there's this SRAM app that tracks it, like how often you're using the dropper post and like how many times per ride it went up and down, and it tells you as well as things about like shifting details and various things. So once you start to see those numbers and imagine the race scenario, as often as they're using those controls, anything you can do to make it faster or smoother, or make it so that they can use the suspension controls more to get the bike to be even more perfect more of the time, as the course changes throughout the lap. It translates to small, a microsecond here or a fraction of one there. Yep. Extrapolated over a lap, maybe it's a few seconds, and extrapolated over a race, maybe it's 20 or 30, or 20 or 30 seconds. They could, expend less effort than they would. They could save some energy for 20 or 30 seconds worth of riding, or who knows, but it's to their advantage. And so I think, Nino's appreciative, and Kate's been appreciative for a long time. Of having a mechanic. The mechanic is not just sort of a binary figure like cleaning, washing, setting the bike up to the specs that the manufacturer provides and giving you a perfectly functional bike, and that's where it ends. But instead, in our free time, researching and brainstorming and chit-chatting and imagining scenarios where, we could take what we have, modify it, and make it better for them than than otherwise would be, and that's maybe an advantage they have over their competitors too, which perhaps that's huge. Why they like to keep us around. So
for sure.
But so far we haven't had we have reason to believe it's effective and helpful. So we're going to stick with the program for now.
Nice. What is your how fully are you kind of tearing down and rebuilding her bike between races? Like, say if you have a race back to back on 2 different weekends.
Well, so if it in that context, I would say like halfway down. I don't necessarily take the bike apart, and Yannick and I are like-minded in this. And I've worked with other mechanics in the past who maybe felt like was doing more. I think doing more sometimes is doing too much, and Yannick actually put it well when he described it as a bicycle is like a wound or like a scab. And the more you do to it, the more you mess with it, sometimes it makes it worse. And that can be true. I think you have to be a good mechanic to know when something is okay and doesn't need to be taken apart just because,
Sure, yeah.
You need to be real confident that it doesn't, because if that's the reason that, something went wrong, then suddenly it was a really bad idea to leave it alone. But I think in both of our cases, we're familiar and understand the bikes well enough that, things like suspension bearing pivots, if the race was dry, I'm not going to pop those out and put new ones in. Even in the same month, definitely not week after week. If it was a wet race, probably I will. But even if they're probably feeling okay, the bike feels okay, doesn't sound bad, doesn't creak, I might still, just because I know what happens to bikes and bearings when they've been pressure washed and ridden through mud, for 4 days in a weekend for a race, and then you show up next week. The bearings will probably be a little bit corroded, probably pretty rough, and they probably need to go. And so it's just kind of interpreting what the bike went through previously. There's definitely a general protocol I follow when I'm, quote unquote cleaning the bike. It's a lot more than that, and it's usually there's at least suspension seal work, if not a full rebuild of the fork. Usually, a 2-weekend race that might not happen, but if I'm I have a race in April and a race in the beginning of May, there will be at least one suspension rebuild in that time, and it might be right before the race in May, or it might be because there was bad conditions at some point in April. But if it was really dry and the bike was good and the suspension was working well and it had been rebuilt recently, I probably wouldn't tear it apart just because for the following race the next weekend. So it's a little bit circumstance dependent on exactly how deep I'll go, but I also like to clean the bikes really thoroughly, and in those moments, that's when I tend to discover very small issues, if they exist. And so, at some point in a race week, I'm going to pull, the derailleur apart down to the pulleys and clean out the pulley wheel bearings and oil them so that they're spinning at, zero friction, and do the same to the bottom bracket bearings. And when I'm prepping the suspension bearings, I like to do that too, so that even there's no friction, or, as little as possible.
Yeah.
And I like to modify certain things on the bikes that I don't necessarily recommend to the day-to-day bicycle user, because it may compromise its long-term weather resistance. But I like to modify, for example, the seals on the bottom bracket bearings so that they spin with even less drag from seal contact, and use different lubes in there that make them spin incredibly smoothly, but it doesn't last for more than a weekend of riding probably before it needs to be done again. And so there's little ways that basically every part we use is, for the most part, I would say every part we use is made for the consumer market. They're not just producing, it's not like an F1 team where you're producing prototype parts for this one car and spending $1 million on it, and it doesn't ever see production, or no one ever necessarily benefits from that. We're taking stuff that's either already in the hands of consumers or is going to be, it's a product that's coming. And and so, inherently those products are a little bit overbuilt, or a little bit, they're made to last, they're made to be durable, especially mountain bike parts, because people do ride them in, nasty weather, and they do spray them with a hose. So there have to be some, I guess they don't have to be, but there often are, some built-in elements into, in particular, bearing seals and fork seals and suspension stuff, that they try to make it so that it lasts a while without requiring service, because I think people get frustrated when their bikes require constant service. And since my job is to constantly be servicing a bike, I can kind of cheat some of those systems to get better performance out of the product, even if it would theoretically compromise their long-term durability. That's not a factor for us. And so, I have the freedom to, and also the depth of parts in my parts bin, just a luxury that we have on our team, that we can do that stuff. And if it does wear out quick, that's okay too, as long as it performed at its best, the best of its capability, or even beyond what it's, normally capable of. And so those are the things that excite me about doing the job. And when you get to work with a rider who's at her, or, in Yannick's case too, at the peak of, Nino's obviously the best that ever did it. And when you have riders like Kate or Nino who show up every race with the potential to win, that's when little things really actually matter. I can do the same stuff to my bike, and yeah, sure, it feels nice when my bottom bracket bearings are spinning perfectly, but it doesn't really matter. It wouldn't make or break the outcome of my bike ride, but for Kate and Nino, like, those little things can actually make the difference, even if it's only good for a few seconds. Sometimes races are, yeah,
they're one on that.
One by only a few seconds, or they're one in a sprint, and the rider who didn't have to work as hard throughout the race because the bike was more efficient suddenly has a little bit more in the tank at the end, And so that's like a bit of theoretical mechanic theory, kind of where you don't have a way to quantify exactly how important what you did was, but you are pretty sure it made a difference, And so I think if you talk to most mechanics, a lot of what we do is we think it makes a difference, but there's not a way of quantifying it, and there thankfully are more and more ways to quantify some of the things that we're doing, but a lot of it is almost superstitious, or at least
it worked last time.
Some voodoo magic stuff where we're pretty sure, I'm pretty sure it's faster now. So
nice.
But yeah, as long as it's not slower, then I think we've done our job well, and if it is fast, then we've done our job very well. So
nice. All right,
that's what we're shooting for.
Sweet. So how many bikes are you typically bringing with you? Like, say, when you go to a race in Europe and you're going to be in Europe for a while, like, how many bikes are you bringing for Kate, and are you bringing one for yourself as well?
Yeah, so we have the fortune of having a lot of bikes.
Uh-huh.
It's a gift and a curse, because it's a lot to keep track of. We have like duplicate bikes, First of all, so with Specialized and with Scott now, the rate. Scott is actually a privately owned team that Frishy owns, but Scott is very obviously tied up in it from a marketing side, and they're very interested in aligning their marketing efforts with the team and vice versa. And so with Kate and with Nino, last year you saw at one point in the year, both of them were racing on some silver custom or like limited edition bikes.
Yeah, those are sweet.
And for Worlds, they got the kind of candy apple red silver bikes. Before that, they had some bikes. Kate's was like sort of a pinkish red color, and Nino's was neon yellow that like faded to rainbow sparkles,
Yeah.
And these are all future colorways that like would be offered later, and so the team races them first. They gain both the interest from people who just see them during racing, but then also they've gathered photos and videos and various marketing type assets that they can then use to market those products later. And so that's kind of like the business side of all of this. And then because of that, the good news is we only race the same bike for like 2 months, maybe. And oftentimes too, like at the beginning of the season, for example, we'll have one of the same bikes, both hardtail and full suspension. So both the Scott Scale and the Spark, same color, same build, one of each in the US and one of each, and then the same again in Switzerland. So that's where our team headquarters is based, is in Switzerland. And so when we fly over, usually we only bring like maybe one bike, usually like a Spark that's like a backup bike. But maybe by the end of the season, we might not even fly with any bikes to Europe, because we'll have, I'll go over there, I'll be building up one of these new ones, whatever new, color they want to showcase. I'll go up, I'll go there. We always fly over early because we come from the US, and there's always a bit of a jet lag adjustment that needs to be accounted for. So usually I'll spend a little time preparing for the race and all the, supplies and materials with Yannick, and then maybe also in the days leading up to a race, leaving for a race, I'll also assemble a new bike, or two. And so, we'll fly over there with nothing. I'll build up a bike, we'll pack everything up, and then we'll drive from Switzerland to, wherever the actual race is. It could be Italy, it could be Germany, it could be the Czech Republic, but we always start in Switzerland. And so it's nice to be able to not actually have to take bikes apart too much and travel around and risk damaging them and, so forth. So, in an ideal situation, the answer would be 0. Sometimes it's 1 or 2. Kind of depends on the season and in some circumstances. But
sure.
With as many bikes as she uses in a season, you know, at this point we have every, like to the millimeter, every exact detail of where every control on the handlebar is located and exactly what angle the saddle tilt is, plus, you know, every other normal dimension that you would take into account.
Yeah.
All the way down to like pedal release, spring tension settings, and all this stuff. So basically, I can build a bike without her even being there, and you know, blindfold her and put her on one or the other, and she might not be able to tell the difference. And that's my goal. You know, there's always a little bit of that touch at the fingers that maybe it takes her to, you know, say, no, this brake lever is just a little bit too high. We need to just like lower that a bit or move it in or out a millimeter or two. But beyond that, it's like, you know, pretty damn close every time. And so, you know, at first there was some reluctance or hesitation about, you know, I wish I could just bring my bike that I've been riding these last weeks. I don't have to fly over and get on a totally new bike, but I think now she's seeing that it can, you know, that it can be done this way. And it's so sometimes we might bring, just in case, like the same seat post and seat assembly from a bike at home and bring it across, just so there's no, you know, maybe for the first day of training, just ride that setup so there's no fiddling required. And then, you know, we either use that for the race or maybe take all the measurements again and recreate it on a new seat post. But much easier to travel with a seat and a seat post than a whole bike. And so,
for sure.
So, you know, once we're there, for each rider, I would say we probably have 3 bikes per race, which would be like at least 2, if not 3, like the hardtailed full suspension bike and then a backup bike. In the case of, you know, the crash or some sort of damage that were to happen, there's always a backup, you know, waiting.
Yeah.
So we have probably like 10 wheel sets, you know, 8 complete component groups and about 1 million tires, and then like a couple, like 1 spare frame for each rider's size, plus a backup complete bike, and then a hardtail and a full suspension race bike. So that's like, you know, 12 bikes basically, probably for the riders. And then there would be, you know, Trishy's bike. Jonick and Kurt may or may not bring a bike, and I may or may not bring a bike, kind of depending. But we might have within our whole entourage of staff and riders, you know, 15 or 20 bikes at a race. And
nice.
And that's a lot for, you know, for 4 riders. But I'm kind of, you know, Jonick and I are very aligned in our approach to this, and I appreciate working with somebody like that. But we both just like to over prepare to the point that, you know, there's no risk of emergencies occurring. Like, there is always something available for every circumstance that could occur. You know, we have the solution already prepared, and that's, you know, that helps us sleep at night. That gives the riders a great deal of confidence in the team and who's there supporting them. And you know, when you kind of don't feel like anything could go wrong, it goes a long way for your mental state. So I think even just having people doing a good job of preparing things is actually probably to the rider's advantage, you know, in a certain small way, just psychologically, just knowing that this team has thought of everything and it's got your back. And so, yeah, as a rider, you just show up, and if you can do your job, then odds are good that you're going to have a successful weekend.
Totally. Yeah, and it sounds like you've got a lot of the kind of the stress management dialed. What would you say is a stressful part of the job, if there is one?
You know, there's always like little surprises that pop up as you're traveling around. Like, it's kind of inevitable, and you never know. It could be a vehicle problem, like one of the team vehicles. This may not be stressful for Kate, but it's stressful for me. You know, something happens, and then like you're at a race and you need to like sort that out too, on top of the other stuff you're doing. You know, like somehow figure out how to like get this car fixed while we're like stuck on the side of the road in Andorra. Like, where do you go? But you know, I think the only stress really is just sort of the anxiety of anticipating what we're there to do, because we get there on Wednesday, maybe sometimes even earlier, Tuesday, perhaps before a weekend of racing. It's a lot of time to sit around and like think about it, you know. And especially I think when Kate's feeling really good, that's actually kind of a difficult time to be kind of waiting because, during a race week, she doesn't have that much to fill her days with. She'll ride a couple hours, do some time on the course or, a little spin on the road, but she's not riding multiple hours a day at the gym. And
right.
so she's thinking about it a lot,
Yep.
And so I think when she's feeling really confident and excited to race, but like isn't racing, then she starts, that can be where like anxieties creep in. It's like, I hope I'm as good as I feel like I'm going to be. Or I hope I get it right because I feel really strong and I hope I don't mess up or have a problem because I'm feeling really fit. And, I think I'm good this weekend. But the more days you have to sit and think about that, and the more time in the day that you have to think about that, sometimes you can kind of psych yourself out. So I like to try to bring some levity to the situation when I can and try to keep the humor and the feeling light and joke around with her a bit, just kind of get her out of her head. And,
nice.
She likes to do that too. She's a very funny and like playful type personality and likes to joke around and have a fun time. And I think that transcends a lot of what people see of us together.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, you can't really be fun or serious unless you're pretty confident you got the other shit figured out before,
right.
And so I think what people see is true and accurate, but what they may not realize is that, like, we've already done the stressful, hard, anxiety-producing stuff or spent a lot of time behind the scenes when people weren't looking, figuring those things out. And so, plus we've been doing this together with each other for the last 6 years, so we really know, short of those occasional moments of surprise, like we know what to expect when we show up at these places. We know what bike we rode and what settings we had last time we were at these same places. And so we spend a lot of time eliminating the stress or thinking about things and anticipating things ahead of time so that we don't have to face the stress during the time when the pressure's actually on, which is at the race, and then we can kind of almost relax. It's almost I would say it's almost relaxing to be at the race, rather than to be somewhere else thinking about racing. Because once you're there, you know exactly what your job is and how to do it, and
totally,
you follow the routine. And then once that's over, you can just enjoy yourself.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I've heard similar things from a few different team managers that once you're at the race, your job's kind of done. So it's kind of time to relax.
Yeah.
So I got a couple different kind of wrap-up questions, and then maybe I'll shoot you a couple different questions, just brief stuff via email. So one big one that I have a hunch you're going to have a good answer for is, what did it feel like to see the athlete you work with take the World Championship title and then the World Cup overall? What is that experience like?
Well, Kate and I both sort of talk about how you know what imposter syndrome is, where it's
yes.
Sometimes hard to believe that you're the person doing this.
Yeah, absolutely.
How am I that guy that's the one, or how am I this rider who I'm just this random idiot person? How did I manage to do this?
Yeah.
That's how I go about my day every single day, and and I think I don't want, if Kate's listening, I don't want her, or reading, I don't want her to hear that I said idiot. That's not what I meant. But how does some dumb old person like me end up here doing this now?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how it was, and it still is. And I knew, because I've seen how hard Kate works, and people get a glimpse of that because if you follow her on social media, you get to see some of the crazy gym stuff that she does. But that's the tip of the iceberg. That's at the end of the workout, she does the fun, kind of creative, entertaining balance exercises and stuff.
Sure.
But hard work, I've been there for it a lot and heard about it and tried to do some and failed miserably. And
it looks difficult.
I've seen what goes into it. So I had a lot of confidence that at some point Kate would do something special in the sport of mountain biking, and I knew that because of her personality and the way that she presents the sport of mountain biking to the public, it's super appealing in a way that just pure competition isn't. She does a great job of showcasing the fun and meaningful side of bike riding in the midst of being the number one ranked rider in the world, but still manages to convey a fun and light attitude and approach to cycling, which is partially accurate. I mean, she definitely is incredibly serious at the times when she has to be, and no one could win what she's won, and especially as early as she's done it if they weren't. But she's an incredibly hard worker. So like I did think one day we would be celebrating a big win together. I didn't think it was going to be like every year immediately. So
and the biggest version win.
As soon as she got out of school, I mean, even then, like this was before World Championships, but she won her first elite national championship title she was still U23 and won that race by like 5 minutes, and it was just like a merciless just slaughter, and it was amazing. And like, you know, she had never raced an elite national championship before, let alone, you know, won one or anything like that. And so that first year after she got done with school officially, like her performance was just so shockingly improved over the past year. And it was not bad before either. You know, I was like, wow, that's like an incredible just change over the winter time, and just the way she sat on the bike and pedaled it was totally different. She also switched coaches, and her new coach, well, he's not new now, but he's been a coach for many successful athletes over the years, but he became her coach in 2016, 2017. Jim Miller is his name. He's a very accomplished guy, and he really, I think, kind of got a hold of Kate and saw, you know, obviously the same potential that anyone who spends time with her sees in her, and figured out how to harness her energy and her attitude, and challenge her to kind of maybe take it to a level she'd never really taken it before, and the results were immediate. And I think that when she has good results, this might be her Achilles heel sometimes. When she has good results, she works even harder, you know, and she's motivated by her own success and her own achievements to see how much farther she can go. At times, she maybe as a young rider has, if there's a fault, it would be taking that motivation and training maybe even a little bit too hard, and then perhaps has found herself in situations where she maybe had not recovered fully in time to actually race again. But short of those occasional moments, I mean, her results are super consistent. It's not a fluke. You can't look at anything she's ever done and be like, well, she won, but, you know, like she won world championships and then came out and backed it up with a short track win, cross country win, the first World Cup the next year, third place, and then a win at the next World Cup the next weekend, and then did the double again at Leger. I mean, at this point, she's like almost, you know, I mean, she's one of 3 or 4 who are, the money's on those 4, you know, at every race now. And everyone kind of forgot how in 2018 they were like kind of surprised that she won Worlds. Now it's like a surprise when she doesn't win, you know. And so that's a lot of pressure to take on, I guess. I think she likes a little bit of pressure and a little bit of expectation, because it's motivating for her to meet or exceed that and those expectations. But yeah, I mean, it's still, we still have those moments of imposter syndrome all the time. And even like this spring, the one race we actually got to do after we got back from Cyprus, which was for the stage race we did, we got to go to Vail Lake for the season opener that we normally do, the U.S. Cup race in Southern California. And we only got to race short track that weekend because they canceled the cross country for the whole virus situation during that weekend. But we got to race the short track, and it was the first time she'd ever won a short track in the United States, which is funny to say because she's won so much across the world at the highest level, but had never quite put it together for a short track, even though she'd won World Cup short tracks somehow. So that was like actually a goal going into the weekend, and she did win. We talked a lot about tactics, and Jim, her coach, was also talking with her a lot about tactics. And short track's the kind of race you can't win on pure power because it's too short, and everyone who's there, are professional athletes, and they can ride hard for 30 minutes. And so you have to be a little bit more thoughtful in how you approach your effort and how to win the race. And so, that had kind of been like, she was for sure has been the strongest one in the race a number of times and didn't win in the past. And so, she likes to use these races to gauge her fitness as well as her, general improvement over years past. And after winning that, she had a ton of confidence. She kind of finally got that little monkey off her back too, and had won a U.S. short track, which was neither here nor there really in the grand scheme of it, but just a nice thing to, it was like Nino when he won short track at Snowshoe last year in the last World Cup of the season. That was the first time he won a World Cup short track, even though he's the most winning cyclist in the history of cross-country mountain biking. I mean, it was still nice to get that win, even after you've won so much other stuff. So it was really sad because, she was really coming into her form. She was stronger than probably, it's hard to say, but I believe stronger than she'd ever been at the beginning of the year, and was really starting to kind of tune it up towards cross-country specific efforts. With the beginning of our season being a stage race, and like marathon distance stage race.
That was the Sunshine Cup?
It was good. Yeah, it was good. I mean, she won with Annika Langvad as a partner, which is always a help. She won the Cape Epic in 2018, so that was the first stage race Kate had ever done. She never even raced 2 days in a row before. And managed to win the Cape Epic. And she gives a lot of credit to Annika, who set a hard pace that Kate kind of just hung on to for 8 days, but that's still got to hang on, and that's not easy, and that's no one else could. And she was barely 22. I think she was only 22 years old at the time, so a huge win. At a discipline and a type of racing she's not accustomed to doing. And this was then the second effort. But it was at the beginning of the season, and she kind of didn't want to put all of her eggs in the marathon distance basket, because when she did that for Cape Epic, she kind of came out flat for the start of the cross-country season, including the Stellenbosch World Cup that followed 2 weeks later. She didn't really have that high intensity to perform in what is kind of her chosen discipline, or the one that she wants to be the best in. And so, Cyprus was like an appearance. It was a good, hard training block. It was kind of a good fitness test, just like a self-evaluation, but it wasn't really meant to be, like, we didn't go there to win the race necessarily. It was more just like season kind of opener, low stress, go do it. It was a new race for us. We had not ever been to Cyprus, even though it's been, a big race on the calendar for a lot of Europeans since like the late 90s, I think 97 or 98. But we'd never gone, so it was cool. Beautiful place, loved it. The racing was great. The whole environment, honestly, was like a little bit already kind of clouded by the anxiety of the COVID-19 like explosion, because it was sort of taking place and all the news and like new developments were happening like while we were there, to the point that when we were leaving, we're like, God, I hope we can get off the plane when we get to San Francisco. But so, we got off the plane, we still got to go what we thought to Vail Lake to race. But, even as I was driving down there, I was getting updates and texts and seeing things on my phone about LA closing, public gatherings. And I was like, how are we going to even race? And ultimately we barely got to, but, for somebody like Kate, or any pro rider who takes himself seriously, the whole winter time is spent like torturing yourself and denying yourself life's pleasures in order to be super fit in the spring. So to go through all that and have it sort of the rug pulled out from under you, right as it's about to get going, and everything you've been working hard and doing all the sacrificing for is not, allowed anymore. I think it's a bit of a psychologically and emotionally difficult thing to process. I think she's fine, but sad. And being an Olympic year, her first Olympic appearance, and something that, that's been a big focus for many seasons, not just, last year. It's been a 4-year build toward this. And so, there's some lingering sadness, especially with it still being such an uncertain timeline, like we're hopeful that we will race and race World Cups, not just drive, to LA and race a kind of local race, but hopefully we're going to be doing some real racing this year. Latest I've heard is August would be the optimistic first opportunity, with some racing expected to go into October at this point.
Trying to schedule stuff.
Make the World Cup in as possible, but we might be basically going to Europe for 3 months at the end of the summer or into fall, and never coming home, because for us to travel back and forth would be counterproductive and, and actually a detriment to her performance potentially, just being kind of constantly jet lagged, even though, she's pretty good at sleeping on planes much better than me, but still, flying back and forth 2 or 3 times in the span of 6 or 7 weeks, it would be, that would be too much. So we're kind of trying to stay optimistic and positive about the prospects for the season, because it will still matter. Like the results in those races, even though it's not a wash, but it's like one of those seasons that will have an asterisk next to it forever because it was so odd. She still, because of the way that the Olympic start positions are earned or decided, not on like your UCI ranking, for which she's currently number 1, and the UCI is frozen all points, so like she will remain number 1 until racing is like officially unfrozen. Numbers, points gathering is unfrozen by the UCI. But it's by your UCI points at the time, and so basically, and like that's up till the last minute basically right before the Olympics. So all these races will contribute to that, and it's like your prior year's race results and the subsequent points you've earned will determine the start position for the Olympics. So she still has to go. You can't like skip them or phone it in or anything like that. Like you still have to somehow for the next months remain fit and strong and train and do all the things you would, but not maybe like to the final maximum level that you would right before you start really towing the line at big races. But it would be basically like maintaining the base level fitness to where it would take very little to be kind of as fit as she was at Vail Lake the last time we raced. And, for riders and for any athlete, I think it's, like physically you can do that, but just the psychological part of that is the real struggle. And I think you're seeing a lot of athletes opening up about that sentiment. Kate among them. She recently had a pretty well presented perspective that was published in the Wall Street Journal that was it was a big article to get published, but it put it all in perspective like quite well, and I thought very succinctly, and for someone who was literally living the stress to put that article together, I thought was a classy move, and I hope that, she can do what she said she was hoping to do in that article, which is to just kind of enjoy the things that are still enjoyable and not let the clouds kind of get in the way too much. And once they figure out how to open up things and when and give us a timeline, like that will make everything clear and
so what is
that burden? But for now, it's just like so uncertain that like it leaves a lot of room for questioning and stress.
Absolutely. What does work look like for you until races and gets turned back on? Like what's
our team, I think a lot of teams are struggling now with how to make it worth sponsors while during these times where, traditionally we would just be racing and letting the results speak for themselves, and it's a pretty straightforward formula, and there's not a lot of creativity required, and like Kate and I sort of have a lot of fun doing bike check videos and stuff that I think our sponsors appreciate, and because they're like entertaining and fun and presentable and people like them, and so now we've sort of taken that a little more to heart because that's kind of what we've got at this point is like what can we do that's like both lighthearted and fun and not like depressing to talk about constantly, because all you do is hear about this shit over and over again. So we don't really want to like be beating that drum any more than it already is, but also like acknowledging it, but also like presenting things favorably, but also acknowledging people don't want to really buy anything. So it's like a pretty tough balance of like how do you even, bike racing is just glorified marketing anyway, and so like how do you justify whether you're a sponsor, paying for this when there's nothing happening, and as a team, like how do you expect to be paid for something that you can't deliver on, which was the agreement in the first place. So we have obviously good relationships with our sponsors who've been with our team for consistently for a very, very long time and have already extended into the future, and so now we're just sort of trying to create open lines of communication with what would be helpful for them, being more available at this time of the year, in particular for somebody like Kate or Nino, to do more kind of interviews or podcasts or video things or, whatever the case may be, even if it's like self-filmed stuff. And so the whole team is kind of contributing in various different ways, and
that's cool.
Just trying to keep the spirit up and keep the, people aware of the situation as much as possible without depressing them about other situations and making it about that, So it's tough, but for me personally, I'm in touch with Kate like every day, just whether it's just to say hello and how you doing, or send a picture of a animal I saw while I was walking outside. You never know, but it could be anything. But it's just we're still in touch, and obviously there's more to talk about than that too. And we also talk about bike stuff, and at times we refer to me as dial-a mechanic because I don't live right around the corner from Kate. I'm like an hour and a half to 2 hour drive, and so we do a lot of like FaceTime calls where I get to look at whatever she's seeing through her phone camera and can kind of be the brain and let her hands do what I tell them to do. And if she needs to do little things to her bike or find something in the garage that I've organized in there, I can help.
Well, thanks to Brad for taking the time to talk with us, and thanks to Giro for recording this interview. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week. Peace.